Welcome. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to announce his 2024 presidential bid any day now, very likely this week, possibly even tomorrow. What consequences could this have for the Republican Party, for the Trump candidacy, etc.? Welcome to the Daily Objective, brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK. And here to discuss the current state and the future of the Republican Party, particularly as pertains to the upcoming election, here is prosecutor, author, historian James Valliant. James, wonderful to see you as always.
Wonderful to see you as always, Nicholas. I hope you're well. I'm doing quite well today.
I am too. So from my perspective, way up here north of the 49th parallel, I see a lot of disunity in the Republican Party. In fact, one thing that does seem to unite the Republican Party is their hatred of the Democrats. But beyond that, you have so many different groups within the American right. You have the traditional religious conservatives, you have national conservatives, the Tea Party Republicans, the Trumpites, it's paleo conservatives, you name it. What effect do you think Ron DeSantis's entry into the 2024 election will have on the various dynamics of various relationships among the various groups within the Republican Party, and particularly with respect to the diehard supporters of Donald Trump?
Well, see, there at the end, you put your finger right on it. Donald Trump has a cult, has millions of worshipers. When he was running for president the first time around in 2016, he said he could walk down the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody on film and his followers would still love him. And I think if that were true then, it's all the truer now for those who have stuck with him. And boy, has he got an army who stuck with him. A group of people who aren't terribly concerned with principles, in my view, but who are negative in their approach. They just want to stick it to existing government. They distrust existing government. They're not too clear about their ideas or principles. They just feel like they're being diddled by Washington and Trump's their man to do it. And that attitude has not changed. They perceived, now mind you, when Trump was president, he was outspending Obama even before, outspending on discretionary spending, mind you, Obama even before COVID. He was spending like a drunken sailor and giving Democrats and Republicans whatever spending they wanted. But the economic effect of that didn't quite catch up. A lot of the superficial economic statistics at the time were just going rosy, ducky, 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 ducky until he left. And he sort of left Biden with the economic bag, although Biden made it worse on himself, mind you, by augmenting the spending and going after oil drilling and doing all kinds of other stupid things that I think that have only aggravated the economy. So the perception is on the part of Republicans, Biden is across the board a screw up. Crime is up. The border's a chaotic mess. He's weak on foreign policy. And my gosh, the economy just stinks, according to everybody. And boy, weren't things better back in those salad, halcyon days of Donald Trump being president. And that has created a Donald Trump cult that I think will follow him in an emotionalistic way. It doesn't matter quite what Trump says. Trump can run ads against DeSantis, attacking DeSantis for example, wanting to reform Social Security when he was a long-term congressman from Florida. Now, DeSantis is absolutely right. I mean, even for the sake of people who are on Social Security, the thing's going to go bankrupt. But no, Donald Trump has to join in the Democrat attack on DeSantis for even daring to breathe an idea of reforming entitlements. Donald Trump is not a friend of capitalism. He never has been a friend of capitalism. He's opposed free trade. He wanted the Fed to have zero interest rates, jawboned what was supposed to be the independent Fed into keeping zero interest rates to keep the economy rosy while he was president. He doesn't know free market, and he doesn't know principle if it would bit him in the rear end, it seemed to me. A single principle if it bit him in the rear end, it seemed to me. So one could think on the one hand that, well, gee, DeSantis is our preferred option, but what he's come down to being is the non-Trump alternative. Trump, as having been the president, has so much political capital. There are Congress people who feel they owe their election to the help he gave them, which only a president can give during these last critical elections. And so he's got a lot of political capital out there too. He's also got the name recognition. He's got this vast cult. So the Republicans, while they are disunified, Trump is still the clear front runner. He's the man to beat. Now, DeSantis hasn't yet announced. And so the polls and stuff really will only start kicking in and counting once he's announced, it seems to me. People have him as a clear option. But even before his announcement, he's well below in the polls. And has been taking kind of hits in the polls because of Trump's constant attacks on him. But he's sort of the non-Trump guy. But his ideology, in my view, is only marginally, if that, better than Trump's. He, compared to Trump, and obviously politics and history are a matter of compared to what? Compared to Trump, he was a little better on the lockdowns. Compared to Trump, he's a little better on certain things, a little more ideologically on the right, maybe. Not good enough for me, given his attack on corporate America. Too many populist conservatives, like Trump, mind you, and Trump supporters, have been attacking business just for being big business. And they're talking about things that used to be left-wing ideas, like corporate censorship from social media and so forth. And DeSantis has gone after corporations like, most famously, Disney World in Florida, for their taking political stances. And if, as Ayn Rand said, capitalism is not government for business or against business, it's government out of business. And DeSantis is proud to say Florida is where woke goes to die. So he's apparently declared war on certain corporations because of their ideological positions, even though they're private companies. It's a dangerous thing for companies to engage in political activity. Just ask Anheuser-Busch. They've now irritated both sides, the anti-trans and the pro-trans side, by the terrible way that Anheuser-Busch stepped in it with their recent advertising. And boy, did they suffer. That's why corporations tend to stay out of politics. They don't want to alienate a whole section of their potential customer base. So let the free market take care of, police that. Thank you, Governor DeSantis. We don't need the government to be going after corporations. And it is dangerous for government to go after private entities for their political viewpoint. That is un-American. So we basically have a choice between two Republicans who are enemies of capitalism, and I'm going to go that far to say that both of them in their own different ways are just enemies of capitalism in ideological ways. Both are pragmatists, but what you have here is the Trump populist nationalist versus the can we get someone else candidate out there, DeSantis. Now, I hate to keep going on, but just this week, in preparation for his announcement for president, he's been speaking to evangelical groups in Florida, courting them aggressively because Donald Trump seems to be a little squishy on abortion. Now, Donald Trump put those Supreme Court justices in there who overturned abortion, so he's going to get a lot of credit that way. But he says, oh, let's compromise, after 15 weeks or something in the middle. So Trump is a compromiser now on abortion. And the other candidates, smelling blood in the water for the evangelical vote. Now, evangelicals comprise 25% of the entire American electorate. So it's a big, big prize, especially for Republicans who tend to get it. Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, for example, he also is deeply religious and has been courting evangelicals. Well, the competition there now is going to be between all those Republicans wanting the more intense, hardcore evangelical vote, now that Trump appears to be soft on the issue. And so, that, in my view, only makes those candidates more aggressively courting the evangelicals even more suspicious, in my view. So it's not a real, from an objectivist standpoint, we're not looking at a very pretty landscape here. I want to say one last thing, that I know I've gone on and on and on, but one last thing. Senator Tim Scott is the first African-American to be elected to both the House and the Senate. He is the first African-American to be elected senator from a southern state since Reconstruction. Over the last 100 years, no African-American, Democrat or Republican, has been elected a senator in a statewide office in the Deep South. South Carolina, the very heart of the Confederacy, the first state to secede from the Union during the Civil War, has elected, now conservative Republicans in South Carolina elected in a statewide election the first Black senator since Reconstruction. That seems to me that this whole race issue has largely been put to bed in America if conservatives in the South, at the heart of the Confederacy, can elect a Black senator. And so as much as I'd like to sympathize with Senator Scott, he is totally in the bag of the evangelicals, and DeSantis is out there competing for who's going to be the more hardcore on that. So far, the future of the Republican Party looks pretty bleak, is how I would summarize it.
I agree. And one interesting similarity between Trump and DeSantis, both of them have defined themselves and gained a considerable following by appealing to the anti-woke Republicans, but they've gone about it in slightly different ways. So for Trump, it's basically making outrageous comments that offend every conceivable group in society, whether it's women, minorities, immigrants, veterans, the disabled, whereas DeSantis has taken a slightly different tactic, like you said, attacking the Walt Disney Corporation for standing up to his his education policies. Now, of course, there's this whole spat between DeSantis and the NAACP, which we can also talk about. So it seems to me that DeSantis and Trump are both appealing to more extreme factions among Republicans, but how is this going to affect their performance with the more moderate, the more centrist Republicans when the election season actually comes around?
Well, the parties have suffered, the established parties in America have suffered dramatically in recent years. Only about a quarter of Americans identify with each of the main political parties. That's right. About half of all American voters now identify themselves as independent or non-affiliated, which is very, very interesting. Now, most of these folks dramatically oppose many of the things that Trump stood for, and many of these voters dramatically oppose many of the things that Biden stands for. But on the other hand, the party primary system on both sides only encourages playing to what they call the extreme elements, the ideological elements, the activists who get out there and vote in primary elections. And so since it is just Republicans and just Democrats in a polarized environment where you're appealing to the activists on each side, the primaries tend to produce activists who might tend to alienate the independents who are actually the ones who decide most presidential elections in recent years. It was independents who got Trump elected in the first place, and it's independents who got Biden elected in the last election, and fairly elected, I might add. But you're absolutely right. Take the NAACP's attack on Florida right now, issuing, I'm sorry to say this with a serious voice as a joke, issuing a travel warning to minorities not to travel to Florida as they're not welcome in Florida. I would really like to see a murder rate or a homicide rate per 100,000 African Americans comparing to Florida, to say New York or Illinois. And I don't think Florida would come out the loser on that statistic. If the NAACP is concerned with African American lives, let me suggest they're ignoring of the routine deaths of young African Americans that occur every weekend in Chicago is where they probably should put their focus. But no. For ideological reasons, they're after him. I don't think that's going to make. In fact, that'll help DeSantis in the Republican race as such. What
do you think is motivating the NAACP in jumping into the fray here?
Well, the NAACP is.
I mean, they have the right to free speech, but what do they think they're actually gaining?
They want Trump to be the candidate. Most left-wing lobby groups want Trump to be the candidate. They think Trump will be much easier because of the negatives he established as president. He did unimpress many independents in this country, and that's why he lost the second time around. So they're thinking that just like with a Biden-Trump rematch, Biden might win again, just like he did that time. So they would much prefer Trump over some new name, especially over an extremely popular governor like DeSantis. So NAACP wants to discredit Florida and DeSantis and they're going to do this, I suspect, just like CNN gave that wonderful town hall forum recently to Trump, which turned out to be a pro-Trump mistake on their part as far as they could see, they are going to help the Republicans choose Donald Trump. They know that Donald Trump is no real principled right winger in the old fashioned sense. They know that he's got these negatives. He's easier to defeat and he'll be easier to manipulate anyway. They are desperately don't want some new, fresh, young voice out there who they think would be harder to beat. So I think that's ultimately the NAACP's motive, is to play presidential politics. Yeah.
And that raises an interesting question. So I know it's difficult to call these things, but if one had to guess, which of the two has the best chance of defeating Joe Biden? Now, I think a strong gust of wind could defeat Joe Biden, but given the choice between DeSantis and Trump, who do you think would have the potential of performing the best in 2024 in a general election with a large segment of the population?
I think DeSantis would have a better chance. He doesn't have all the negatives that Trump does. And I think Trump voters would be compelled to vote for him, even if I don't see Trump voters sitting out a race against Biden. Oh, we'll let Biden get elected because we don't like DeSantis. No. The Trump voters would come home for DeSantis quite readily. So I think DeSantis would be a much stronger candidate because he doesn't have Trump's baggage just as a candidate. Mind you. And that is very much why the Democrats want to help select the Republican nominee and make sure that's Trump. And many Republicans are perfectly willing to let the Democrats select the less electable candidate, it seems to me, because they're so emotionally committed to Trump. Look, if Trump gets railroaded in some legal case, and there's a mixed bag on Trump's legal cases. He was recently found having done sexually battery in a civil case and defaming the woman for having done it. Now, that case is problematic in my view and is iffy, and most Republicans just yawned and didn't really care even about it happening. But there are other issues even worse where the New York DA has gone after Trump on other matters, and it seems to me a total railroad job. The mere fact that Trump is being wrongly prosecuted does not make him a good candidate or even a tolerable candidate in my mind. I can, on the one hand, say Trump is being unfairly targeted, and still, I can walk and chew gum at the same time and still say there's no way in hell I'm ever going to vote for Donald Trump as president. The two can both be true. But there are a lot of Republicans who simply feel this, oh, he's being railroaded, therefore we must get him elected for that very reason. So I think that the Republicans, as it stands now, the Republicans are still likely, and this is still way early, so I'm making just a wild speculative guess. I still think Trump is the leading candidate, despite all his legal troubles, despite all of this. He's going to have the liberal media helping him, frankly, get the nomination and giving him all the attention and all the airtime they can for that very reason. But it's a long way to go. They're announcing presidential candidacies earlier and earlier and earlier with every new cycle. So now by summer, all the major candidates have to get announced, or else they're not going to raise money. And notice what's happening. Tim Scott announced he raised millions and millions. But my goodness, you're going to have to raise $1 billion to run for president these days. So,
would you say that Ron DeSantis is less of an epistemological train wreck than Donald Trump, in the sense of being detached from reality, being detached from truth in his rhetoric and his speech?
Yeah, I would. You're asking me to make a settle call because these are all pragmatist politicians. It's a question of how I'll use technical objectivist term, how psychoepistemologically alienated from reality and reason are they? And in one sense, I would have to say that DeSantis is at least gives lip service more to the old-fashioned Republican principles, good or bad, mind you. That's why he's trying to outflank him with the evangelicals as well. But he's also trying to outflank him ideologically on the right in other ways. So in one sense, he is at least more lip service nominally in favor of principle than Trump is. On the other hand, it's the mixed bag, the heavy mixed bag of his principles that's the problem, and his principles. And I put that in quotes because, again, we're talking about degrees of pragmatist here. We're not talking about degrees of integrity. We're talking about degrees of pragmatism.
We've had some discussions on this channel before about the DeSantis Disney controversy. One point that sometimes comes up. So the background here is Disney had basically control, Walt Disney World had control over its territory. It was basically its own government for some decades. And so DeSantis took that away. Now, could someone make the argument that Disney never should have had those privileges or those rights in the first place?
Well, that's a complex question in my view, a very complex question. Since Disneyland in Southern California opened up, as a revolutionary theme amusement park in the 1950s in Southern California. Well, they had problems with the Anaheim, Santa Ana governments that were local, so they were looking for a new place. Florida offered them a sweet deal. Florida offered them all of these square miles. I mean, literally a whole chunk of two different counties are going to be yours. And guess what? We'll give you the right to have your own police force, fire department. You can do eminent domain. It gave them that kind of local police power. You can have your own tax collection services. Now, did any other big companies get that same deal? No. Should big companies get special deals to get them lured in? Well, I would break up the parts of that into little bits. For example, if it's regulation, I would say all regulatory favors should be gone. That's just total corporate welfare. When it comes to laying off on taxes, well, now I make a comparison to slaves. A bunch of slaves are getting whipped and one slave gets whipped a little less. My call for fairness isn't going to be whip that one slave all the harder. So if you're giving them a little tax relief, it's hard for me to say that that's corporate welfare. Democrats regard any tax breaks, of course, even to individuals, as sort of evil, stealing from the government and unfair. But even there, see, if DeSantis was going to make this a principled issue, he should say, well, all corporations are going to, all special favors to all corporations are going to, or is it just the Disney company because they're woke? See, if it would be Chick-fil-A, a famous national food outlet that takes conservative issues very famously and controversially, would Ron DeSantis be going after Chick-fil-A and its special government treatment? No, I don't think so. But I'll tell you, no one should have eminent domain power. No one. That should never have been given to Disney, because that's not a power even government should have, much less delegated to a private organization. So part of it, truly evil, what Disney got. Part of it, I don't feel so bad about it. But to target Disney when there is all this other corporate cronyism about, and to single them out for their politics, I find very disturbing. Or as president, is he going to single out national corporations because they disagree with his politics?
Right. So he took powers away from Disney that they never should have had to begin with, but he did it for the wrong reasons. He did it purely for personal political reasons.
And I don't see it as a principled stance against special treatment for corporations.
Now, one point that a lot of people are going to raise is, okay, so we don't like Trump, we don't like DeSantis, but what alternative is there? Biden is a disaster. There's really nobody from either party, either the Republicans or the Democrats, who's worth taking seriously, worth voting for. Is there some sense in which DeSantis is maybe the least evil among the two parties, at least the candidates that we know of at present?
Yeah, of the candidates we've mentioned so far, DeSantis is probably the least evil. But I'll tell you, that's what we're talking about, least evil. And so I have to make an assessment personally myself as to whether that evil is so evil I can't vote for it. Because I'll tell you, if it's Biden Trump again, I'm not voting for president again. I'm a none of the above. I've been a none of the above now for the last few elections. I can understand people making different judgment calls on these things for various reasons, various particular issues, and it is a tough call. Objectivism doesn't have a specific foreign policy, a specific election policy, but it does have principles. And I'm going to have to test those principles. I mean, just simply his stance on abortion, simply his position with respect to evangelicals in general may be enough for me to never vote for DeSantis, frankly. And I'm very, very disappointed. out here in California, to vote on, for a on the Republican side is probably just a waste of my vote. I'm a Californian, so the Democrats almost certainly going to win out here. In the primary, I might vote Robert Kennedy Jr. to give a threat to Joe Biden. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is by no means perfect, but he is infinitely better, in my view, than Biden. So a much more interesting, in my view, case may be occurring in the Democratic side between Robert Kennedy Jr. and, well, I don't agree with everything he says. He says some silly things, in fact, but he says things a lot. He's a lot more coherent. He's a lot more on the ball. And he says a lot better things about the COVID lockdowns and corporate welfare than Biden sure does. And so I might enter the Democratic primary in California just so I can vote against Biden and vote for a challenger like Robert Kennedy. I now imagine that. I never thought I would live to see the day where I would be saying in the next election, I'm voting for a Kennedy. But here we are.
Shall we take a moment to check in with Daniel and ask about super chats and comments and questions from our viewers?
So we have a super chat from Christopher. Thank you so much. A super chat from Mary-Aline. Thank you. A super chat from Wes. Thank you so much. A comment from Mary-Aline, also a super chat. In quotation marks, epistemological train wreck. Well said.
Yeah, that's a great term. I love it. Mary-Aline, you're right. That's a gem. We've got to write that down and build it into our vocabularies. An epistemological train wreck. I love it.
A super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. And a super chat from Mary-Aline. Thank you. She says, if I lived in a red state, I'd vote for Biden.
Interesting.
That is interesting. That is interesting. And, you know, there's something to be said for that counterweight argument, right? I want to, how best to, if all I'm doing is not voting it because I want to send a message of protest, wouldn't a vote for the guy who's going to lose in this one also send such a message? And so it's a judgment call. How best do you think your vote will be perceived? Will it be perceived as an anti-Biden vote? Will it be perceived as an anti-Trump vote? And how best to augment the megaphone effect of the message you want to send, which is a no to the other guy? Yeah, that's an interesting approach, and it can't. I've heard it argued both ways.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's interesting to compare the American political landscape with the one up here in Canada. So Canada, we don't really have a proper conservative party. The Conservative Party is militantly centrist. They're straddling the fence so much that fence post is going right up where the sun don't shine. And the only right-wing party we really have is the People's Party of Canada. You know, Maxime Bernier's party.
Yes. Yes. Well, there at least it gives that is actually in some ways a more attractive choice than the American Libertarian Party. The largest, third party in America is the Libertarian Party, but they stand for something so specific ideologically, something too specific ideologically. I would have to be if that's the message I wanted to send, I'd have to be philosophically on board with them. You know, the main parties are really loose confederations. You don't send much of an ideological message by voting for a Democrat or a Republican. You send a clear ideological message when you vote for a third party. And in the case of the American Libertarian Party, and I know other libertarian parties around the world are different, and I might actually support some of them, but in your case, it is I think a better party, which isn't yet totally wedded to all these bad ideas that would make me oppose them as much as the Libertarian Party. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, the one thing that Maxime Bernier was famous for some years ago, he got into a Twitter spat with Greta Thunberg. So he's clearly against the climate change lobby, and
that just warms my heart and puts me in a good mood towards the person in general.
In Canada, definitely the left is a greater danger than the right. For example, we don't really have a strong Christian element or evangelical element. We're really in no danger of losing abortion rights and so on. There's a lot more danger coming from Trudeau's Liberals, from the NDP than
free speech. freedom, real freedom in Canada, I see under attack. You've got a prime minister that has praised China. You know, you've got a prime minister that, you know, I'm not going to question his parentage, but boy, his parents sure were friendly with Fidel Castro. Whatever the details of his parents' relationship with Fidel Castro, his parents certainly were, and he hasn't changed that. If anything, he's more hardcore, and he said sympathetic things about about communist China. So I feel great sympathy for my good friends, and I have many good friends up in Canada. So
I know one contentious point, you know, among objectivists. Where is the in the States? Where is the greatest danger? Does the greatest danger come from the left or the right, or is it both in a slightly different way?
in one sense, the greatest short-term dangers sometimes come from the left. If their economic policies were to be adopted immediately, it could cause a collapse, a terrible collapse in the American economy. They could cause, with one fell swoop, some great disaster to the American economy that I think the Republicans would spread out over time. Now, in another sense, there's no doubt in my mind the Republicans are the more dangerous. If the alleged defenders of capitalism, the ones whose failures are going to get the tar capitalism with this blame for the next 20 years, then the more important party in that sense is Republicans getting it right, and they get it wrong. And more than that, they've now also shifted into a new kind of ideology, which is ideologically just as fascist and just as anti-freedom as the Democrats are. So in many ways, I'm not sure it would be that much marginally better. You know, if you were to ask me 50 years ago, I'd have a different answer on this. 40 years ago, I would have said, like Ayn Rand, that it was a good thing that voters were turning to the right and against the left. Just before Ronald Reagan got elected, America was turning much more to the right. And she said, rah, rah. She didn't like Reagan for his alliance with the religious right. But on the other hand, she said, it's a good thing that people are reacting that way. Now it's a very mixed bag when people react that way, because I'm not sure what all they're reacting to. Are they reacting to anti-immigration policies, high tariff, anti-free trade policies, Donald Trump's, vicious anti-conceptual approach to his opponents and everything else? But what are they reacting to? So for both of those reasons, any flaws of the Republicans are still going to cause people to think badly of capitalism, bizarrely, although they have very little tenuous, even nominal connection to capitalism anymore. And on the other hand, the ideas they are endorsing are becoming more and more and more evil. And in fact, in one way, a greater danger in the long run, I think. I think that in the long run in America, I tend to agree with Dr. Peikoff and the dim hypothesis. I think the long run danger for America is much more from the Christian right.
To put it another way, if someone is going to screw up the economy and screw up the country, better to have the Democrats screw up rather than the Republicans, because some people still associate Republicans with the free market, even though that's utterly ridiculous. But
right, and it'll keep the Republicans saying, well, this didn't work, can't do Trump, can't do this, can't do, right? Keep the Republicans trying to find a better candidate hygienically, and at least if things are going to go to hell, let the Democrats get the blame, honest to goodness, for capitalism. And more than that, now it's getting, like I say, to the point where some of these Republican policies are just downright evil, in my view. Republicans demanding antitrust prosecution of big social media companies and stuff like that. The Republican Party is officially now almost becoming anti-big business, anti-rich people too. It's those evil elites as they embrace the working class in a populist way. Now, don't get me wrong, that helped get Trump elected in 2016. I couldn't have, with my attitudes towards immigration and free trade, I doubt I could have taken Pennsylvania in 2016. But on the other hand, it is taking the Republican Party in, I think, a very, very dangerous direction that would make me skeptical in general about Republicans. Now, I do think this should be assessed on a candidate-to-candidate basis, but any affiliate, we cannot be tribal about either party. We cannot be party committed as objectivists. That I'm very much in agreement with. Once upon a time, the Republicans did tend to be a little better. When Ayn Rand, back when I was born in the early 1960s, tentatively endorsed Barry Goldwater, there was something a little better there since that time, I'm afraid.
Before they were hijacked by the religious conservatives.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
really, it was Reagan's alliance that started the killing of the whole party, in my view, and it's gotten much worse since.
Yeah, and that actually ties in with a point that I believe that Donald Trump is not really the cause of the downfall of the Republican Party. He's an effect many decades in the making.
Indeed.
The party must have been already quite bankrupt in its principles in order for him even to be elected in the first place.
He is the fever and the rash that this evil, corrosive virus that has long been festering in the Republican Party and in America in general has finally come out in. That's a good way of putting it. He is a symptom.
The fever and the rash, that's another good quote.
Thank you.
So one last question.
Sure.
I had a conversation with an objectivist intellectual recently, and what the point he made was that really, if there's to be any hope politically, any hope for the future of the country, it's not going to come from one of the third parties, because they're generally much too small and ineffectual really to be taken seriously to generate any kind of momentum. So the really solid hope would be for some classical liberal objectivist type to try to get a toehold into one of the two major parties, or possibly both, if we could try to get some people in both parties and try to bring them to some more rational, more individualistic ideas?
Yes, if you had Democrats willing to abandon socialism, if you had Republicans willing to abandon evangelical Christianity, I think we might actually get some better candidates. Show me a Democrat who's in favor, say, of serious welfare reform. Show me a Republican who is willing to be reasonable about things like abortion and school prayer. And yeah, maybe I could have a candidate that I could agree with. Most importantly, how about a candidate on each side that would actually stand for the real American principles those parties once stood for? I mean, when I was a kid, the Democrats stood for free speech. Now they're advocating all kinds of censorship. When I was a kid, the Republicans used to stand for open immigration and free trade with other countries. Now they've chucked that in with Trump. So how about coming back to any of the truly American principles that either party once upon a time stood for?
So that's the challenge to our fellow objectivists. We need to infiltrate the major political parties and
we do. I think that's our best bet. I really do.
I agree. Daniel, do we have, so I have an announcement at the end, but Daniel, do we have any final super chats or announcements that you want to make?
No super chats, but we have several great announcements. So in 20 minutes at 7 p.m. UK time, there's going to be the Fountainhead Book Club with Shoshana Milgram for ARCUK members. This session will also be live streamed to YouTube members. And it's also our 50th session of the Fountainhead Book Club. So we are about halfway done with the book.
Wow. And with Professor Milgram, how can you get him? Who's taught the Fountainhead at university level. You cannot get better. You got to check that out, folks. Absolutely. And tomorrow is our 50th Peikoff celebration day. And so we're going to have a celebration for our 50th. And we're going to have a lineup of some special guests whose names will be announced, but you'll recognize many of the names, I promise. And we could have an extra long show tomorrow. So please plan to tune in if you can tomorrow for the live show. We hope to have a lineup of impressive guests tomorrow.
Now that sounds wonderful. And right after that, tomorrow's The Daily Objective is going to be a classical music Ask Me Anything with yours truly. So please send your questions to Daniel between now and tomorrow, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have on the subject of music. Daniel, any final words before we wrap up?
About the daily objective tomorrow, if you are a YouTube member, there will be a post in 5 minutes where you can ask your questions. Or if you are a ARC UK member, you can ask them on WhatsApp. There'll also be an announcement there, and you can message me directly there.
How can you miss any of this, folks? Please do consider becoming a subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK. We are a group of students of objectivism creating a worldwide community and starting a discussion that we think is important if the culture is to improve. And just listen to the stuff, the Fountainhead Book Club, Nicholas on Music, a celebration of Dr. Peikoff and his influence. If you think that what we're doing here is a value, please do consider contributing, subscribing, becoming, joining, hit that join button, and just hit like, share, make comments. We really do appreciate your support. It's what makes it all possible.
Thank you so much, James, for all you do for the ARC UK channel and for a very stimulating discussion today. To all our viewers, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And with that, I wish you all the best premises. Good day.
Be well.